That was a great explanation, because as soon as the shaft gets steep here and I try and rotate, I'm going to miss the golf ball.
Yeah.
So what your brain does, it coordinates two things, really: how open or closed the face is, number one, and then also the balance point of the shaft. All right, dude, so what we're looking at here is a player who's, let's say, reasonably proficient at the game, right? He's playing off, you said, about a 5 handicap.
Was 5, yeah.
Was 5. And sure, we see a lot of players with maybe a funky movement pattern here or there throughout the golf swing, but a lot of them make it work. And we look at the difference between skill and then, let's say, a perfect technique. If you've grown up your whole life, you've never had golf coaching as such, and you've never established any, let's say, what would be considered orthodox setup principles, throughout the golf swing over years and years and hitting thousands of golf balls, you can actually make nearly any movement pattern work through hand-eye coordination and compensations. But we find that a lot of those players eventually get to a plateau where they can't actually get past that. Yep. And this player here, before we start looking at the swing relative to the professional, what was his limitations with his golf game?
Yeah, so obviously how he sets up to the ball, right, kind of standing up quite tall. Yeah, a lot of Olin deviation at setup as well, which, you know, at the end of the day, it's going to start the golf swing off in a fashion that we kind of don't want ideally, just given his nature of the top position that he gets into. But, you know, quite a tight lower body, quite a tight back as well, which is, you know, part of the reason why he potentially set up like this. So there was a lot of body limitations physically as well that we had to kind of work towards over time.
Okay, and let's talk about issues with contact and curvature. So was he struggling with start line control, contact? What was his big concerns here?
Yeah, massive start line issues. So a lot of it was steep and across, angle of attack about 8-9 down with a mid iron, closed club face, so started that ball well left. And if it did, obviously the good one that he could hit would start left and cut back. Okay. But it was still very low, launch angle somewhere around, or with driver, it was like 5 and 6.
Yeah.
Launch.
Wow. Okay. So he's certainly getting to a level where he's probably losing distance. He's not hitting enough fairways, and then he's got too far into the green to really compete at a level better than a 5 handicap. And around his home track with experience, he probably gets it done, but to level up, he probably wants a little bit.
Couldn't hold greens either, just due to the fact that the ball was coming out so low. So, couldn't hold any greens, couldn't get him to stop, and really had no control once the ball left the face.
Okay, so let's talk about, when we are observing these two swings, the effect of the setup position, posture, and stance relative to the professional over here on the right-hand side, and how that actually affects the whole overall golf swing movement. So we can see that, as you were describing before, very minimal knee flex. We can see there's very minimal front bend, or how much he's bent down from the waist. Secondary to that, we can see that the angle from the shaft going up into his body is actually kind of going through his belly button almost. Now, just using the differences of what we see over here on the right-hand side, a lot more bend from the hips. And then if we're drawing this line up from the club shaft, generally with a professional golfer, we would see that kind of hits about the belt buckle line there. Okay, so now, all in all, there is a huge difference in the distance that this player is standing away from the golf ball over here on the left-hand side, so the distance between here and here versus the professional here and here. And essentially he's just running out of space throughout the golf swing. Now, what we are going to talk about here is then the follow-on effects of that, from being too close and too upright with too much down hinge, and then how that, just all things being equal, starts to move the club shaft, right? So as I play this through over here on the left-hand side, I want you to talk me through it.
Yeah, so as you can see there, right, you were suggesting there's no real room just based on the setup. So the only room he had was to go out and away from his body. And when we do that, we roll the lead forearm. Basically, if you think about it in a clockwise direction, right, that would then get the arms to separate from the body at that initial takeaway. The club potentially can move too far inward, but more importantly with that movement, what it creates is a laid off position at the top, where the lead forearm is the roll of that lead forearm is maximized. Potentially even the external rotation of that trail shoulder. Once that's maximized, we can no longer essentially shallow that shaft, right? So what has to happen is we have to do the opposite, which is to get the lead forearm to rotate the other way, internally rotate that trail shoulder, which does all the steepening effects that a golf swing, which produces a lot of steepening aspects. So
what we'll look at here, and based on the movement of the professional over here on the right-hand side, we'll go lead arm parallel in the backswing, and then lead arm parallel in the downswing, and we'll use a red line to start off with, and then we'll use a green line for the representation of the downswing. And you can see how that green line is essentially flatter to the ground than the red line. We often see that with a professional, is that in the backswing, the shaft will work from a steep to a shallow orientation. Now, if we have a look at the amateur golfer over here on the left-hand side that's struggling with this, if we go to lead arm parallel, red line there, and then as he starts to change direction, we can see that that shaft relative to the pro, even though his hands have gone more in, it is steeper. So the green line is steeper than the red versus over here on the right with the pro, we can see it's actually shallower than the red. So a very common pattern that we see with the pro is that they will take that golf club back a little bit steeper, and then it works into a shallow orientation. And that really just means that the golf swing and the delivery of the club coming in, it's got more of a chance to strike the ball really well. So as a result of the setup, he had a bit of forearm roll in the backswing. The shaft went from a shallow to a steep orientation, which is what we're going to be talking the majority about in this lesson today, is how that setup influenced that movement pattern. And then from there, really, the rest of it's just an effect. So let's talk about the process that you went through working on with this player. And I will recreate the movement pattern that we saw. And what I want you to do is kind of talk me through it. So he was very narrow, which we didn't say in that video, but he was very close to the ball. He also had a lot of weight loaded up on his trail side, very minimal front bend. And as a result of that, a lot of ulnar deviation where his wrists are down hinged, okay? So
he also had a very narrow stance as well. So even, perfect there.
Okay, so very narrow. So if you're just looking at this image here, and this is a great one for the guys at home, is this doesn't look athletic at all.
Not at all.
Like, if you're trying to create a lot of power and speed set from this position, I feel like I am going to probably fall over. And as a result of doing that, subconsciously what your brain does, well, it's going to restrict certain movements to ensure that at the end of the day, you don't fall over, right? So walk me through the movement of the club head and the shaft here. So as I was swinging this back, and you can come and move this shaft for me.
Yeah, so what he did initially, right, was he would get these hands out and away from the body and have little depth in the hands, right? So this lead forearm would rotate in a clockwise direction, hands would go out, club would go in. From there, he would just continue to the top. And now we talk about that same, what we spoke about before, this forearm's too far rotated clockwise, this trail shoulders in external rotation. And now basically there's no chance of shallowing at all from there. Like,
I feel like this is maxing out the stretch of my shoulder.
And it's probably going to hurt you in here too. So the effect of that is all we can really do
is come back,
is steepen it that way.
And when you do make this steepening motion, that results in that swing direction that's going left, and also the angle of attack, which is heading too far down. Okay, so just quickly reenacting that. So weight too far back, hands were lifting, club head going in, shaft as an exaggeration here, very laid off, then no room to come down, club moves into this pattern.
Absolutely.
So we've got some after videos here that will show the guys towards the end, and you did an incredible job here. And you started with the setup, because this is great for nearly all recreational golfers to work on. The main reason being is the setup pieces, they can control as much as they like before they hit the golf. That doesn't mean that we're going to spend 10 hours trying to get perfect, but a wider stance certainly helps us pivot a little bit more. For this gentleman here, a little bit more front bend, put him into a position that he could get this golf club orbiting in a more circular fashion. So you widen his stance, we got a little bit more front bend from there. Let's talk about what happens when I do get front bend. Let's say we set up here, and then as I do get front bend, what do we notice the handle does from there, Ryan?
Yeah, so obviously the more upright we are, right, we have to have our hands higher. It's the only way we can reach the ground. So if we can get a little bit more front bend, naturally our hands are going to need to, I guess, lower. We're going to get a little bit more what we call like radial deviation in our hands as well. So they're, essentially if you're standing too tall, you have to ulnar deviate these hands to get some length in order to get that club to the ground.
And then when we actually lower those hands, that actually encourages more hinge of the wrists and load on the shaft, which then encourages more power coming down with the golf ball. So setting up here a little bit wider, we bent down from the hips, that naturally lowered the handle. And then from there, a lot of the heavy lifting was done. But what was the feeling and sensation that you got this player to do in the backswing?
Yeah, so essentially from a body perspective, right, when we have a wider setup, we can now actually load the body a lot better. So when we're standing too narrow, all we could really do to get some power was like kind of move off the ball this way and then
sway and lift.
Yeah, sway and lift. And then, I mean, yeah, to get any power, really, you had to kind of step with this foot to actually do anything, because it was just like an upper body movement. So at the end of the day, if we get ourselves a little wider, we're now in a position that we've got some power, right? We're ready to I guess, explode. For a better word, right? So with the stance width being wider, we basically just were able to feel like he was moving into his right side a lot better. So basically he was just able to rotate into this trail leg, feeling a little bit of stretch in the glute there.
Love that, love that.
Yeah.
So as I do that, and I'll get you to stand over here just so you can help me with this pivot movement. This gentleman wasn't used to rotating very much at all with his torso as his lower body. So if we look at this trail hip here, if I freeze everything up, my hands are naturally going to lift, even from this new, better setup position. But as soon as I allow that body to start to rotate, right, and we can see that as this hip moves back, my trail leg begins to extend. I can feel the pressure in my right heel, which is very important, because this gentleman said that he almost felt like he was going to fall over at times. So anything else you'd add to that, Ryan?
Yeah, so from there, right, we've got more depth in the arms.
Perfect.
Okay, and we still felt like this was not rotating as much.
Yeah, it wasn't over here. So.
Exactly, right. So we were able to get the club essentially as a feeling standing up a little more steeper in the backswing.
Yeah, interesting.
And then from there, right, we've now got our arms and our trail shoulder in a better position, that now on the way down, we're able to feel like the center of mass, so basically right here where I'm holding the club, is able to fall a little bit more behind you. Now, the best thing about this, and what I say to a lot of players, is that position there now facilitates rotation.
Does.
Right?
Absolutely.
So if you're steep, and I say this to so many golfers, that everyone's trying to rotate. I want to rotate better. If you're steep, your body goes, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas if you're a little bit more shallow, well, then from there, we're able to rotate. So if you're trying to get more rotation in your body, right, or in the downswing, you need to be somewhat shallow.
Exactly.
Can't be steep.
Because, and that was a great explanation, because as soon as the shaft gets steep here and I try and rotate, I'm going to miss the golf ball.
Yeah.
So what your brain does, it coordinates two things, really: how open or closed the face is, number one, and then also the balance point of the shaft. So if the shaft is very upright like this, your body is intuitively going to stop rotating, the handle's going to lift. Before you know it, chicken wing central, and we're going to struggle with our contact here.
Yeah, and golfers know where the club is in space, and they're always trying to somewhat get it behind the hands on the way down. So, and a way to do that is to tilt that upper body back this way. So that's what happens in a golf swing when the club gets steep.
So from the setup here, then getting to the top, essentially that's going to give us the feeling. You gave him some slow, deliberate swings to work on. And by simply just getting into this new setup position, feeling like we're getting more pressure into the trail heel, allowing that hip to turn, then making some smooth swings. He said to you that it just felt like he had so much more room, and straight away, that angle of attack and that swing direction, well, that was sorted out, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Fantastic. All right, mate. So I'm going to put it all together and hit one down there. One last little feel into this new setup position. Nice amount of rotation. I can feel that I'm not overstretching that forearm roll in the backswing. Let's see how it goes.